We are glad to be back at the Table Cooperative. We're going to try to host conversations with a little bit more of a teaching input, maybe less frequently, but more intentionally around covering topics of interest to stir some conversations and help people. And then maybe put those out there onto the internet for other people to see and see if we can't build a community here around these ideas. So tonight, Kris is going to share with us about table fellowship with those who are marginalized and sharing some of her own experiences as a pastor and leader in a church and someone who makes disciples in a neighborhood, and also open it up to some interesting comments and questions from us from our own experiences as well. So we're going to interact together, but we're going to turn it over to Kris to get the conversation started.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, thanks, Gino. Yeah, like you said, we know that I think we've been putting this one off I think for like three sessions. It's been the canceled piece, so it's good to finally reconvene and all. So I'm here actually outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And so I'm the pastor of what's Table Life Church, but then we also have a table fellowship dinner church called the Supper Table in our community, in a public building that we meet for dinner around tables, and it's open and invited to all. It's not a soup kitchen, but it's meant for people to interact and connect with one another. And it's interesting because lonely people span across socioeconomic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, challenges in life, recovery, just in so many different areas. People who join us range from people living in their cars to someone who owns a CrossFit gym. And so being around table is kind of that equalizer place. So, so I want to just talk a little bit about just some lessons learned. Like I said, I'm not a pro at this. I'm still figuring things out, though I've done a bunch of study and partnerships with people in the community. We have this really cool ministry called New Hope Ministries that really works with marginalized people across the board and all kinds of needs, from immigrants to housing to job challenges to food pantry to et cetera, to elderly. And so I think my heart comes from the place because I know when I read the Gospels, Jesus notices and ministers to the least and the lowly and people who are cast out by society. Stories of the widows, the lepers, children, women, foreigners, people that were deemed outsiders. And so I think that in order to be faithful ministers of the gospel, that we need to be embodying that on the margins of today's society as well. And I think when I define marginalized, I'm talking about those who are not embraced by or who are excluded from a dominant culture or community. And I think it's important to note that, and the NIH defines that here in the States as marginalized communities are those excluded from mainstream social, economic, educational, and or cultural life. So that's just a kind of undergirding definition there. But I think it's important to note, though, that what defines someone who is marginalized is highly contextual in both regions, in cities, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, different perspectives. And I think that, someone in our here, mid-Atlantic context may or may not suffer exclusion under the same circumstances that in another area, in a global context might be. So I think, the question that when we're beginning to develop a heart for people who are in that place in society is really thinking who is in our local community who's isolated and is not embraced by or maybe excluded from that dominant culture community. And there can be a lot of different factors involved with that, through power differentials, through who are the races that are most present, but also socioeconomically tends to be a stratification that happens in most communities. And whether you see those who are on the streets or not, that they still live and still exist in most communities, even suburbia. So I'm speaking this broadly as who is marginalized, and it's going to be different, I think, for each and every one of us. But I think, for the point being is that how do we continue to build relationships, especially table fellowships, with people that are coming from probably just looking at us all gathered here who have access to a computer and probably have received some sort of higher education, that we're ministering with people that do not have those factors. And for whatever reasons, by societal influences, are considered to be on the margins. So like I said, I'm defining this very broadly because I wanted to apply to each of our settings here. So who is isolated? Who's living on the margins? So our community, I'll speak specifically here. We have high incidence of addictions, especially heroin and alcohol, in our community. And so there is a conflict between those who have not wrestled with those things and have no background and have, if you want to say, the seemingly picture perfect families and houses and incomes to match, with those who have been cast out of their families because of their addictions, have ended up in hospitals, and have been on the streets. And so our community has a lot of recovery houses that have continually been met with a lot of opposition by our township. We have townships and boroughs here in Pennsylvania, but our community and our governing structures and people that will speak up at meetings and say, we don't want those people here because they're bad influences. They're going to get my kids addicted. They're going to do all these bad things. They're going to cause crime. So that's one, I would say, marginalized community that we specifically reach out to and minister with. And, another would be those who are food insecure and the elderly. The forgotten ones, we call the elderly, because they're mostly quiet and they suffer silently, both from a lack of medical care, from resources, from what was the last statistic? 70% of people in our community eat all their meals every day alone. And so that was something that just really broke my heart and our group that has started the supper table with. So thinking of, once again, the people that are on, that are isolated, that are lonely, that are either cast away or that we don't want here, that's where we believe Jesus's heartbeat is. So one of my big lessons learned, and maybe you can relate to this, and hopefully Gino and I will have some conversation about this as well, is that it's important to not frame, like our language is really important, is that we're not ministering or serving to people or even for people, but we're serving with them, and with being withness, as our incarnate God through Jesus Christ. We're embodying that with the other. And that especially is so important with people that have been discarded by others or cast aside for lots of reasons. And so it's very easy to be we're the people, we want to start something, we want to invite people to come, and we're serving to a people and we're serving for a people, and it's a one-way street that actually is propagating the problem, because we are looking at ourselves, we talk about like a white savior complex. Well, that can happen in a lot of savior complexes, that as the church, we go into areas and think that we're going to, okay, we need to feed those hungry people and do it. And we have this cascading downward effect instead of which is we're inviting in. And so we've been intentional about having a posture that, supper table. So We meet a Thursday at this community building, set up tables, have a full meal, have discussion around tables, have a time of prayer, and all are invited in that. But we invite people into that. So the rule of thumb is you come once as the guest. The second time that you come, you're a part of this. Meaning that you're here setting up, you're here tearing down, you're here serving food, you're here having discussion, that you are a part. It's not an us versus them, but it's a we. And so the beautiful thing is over time, especially when you begin to develop that kind of culture around tables, you can't tell who started the thing and who's been coming and who was invited by so-and-so and who the neighbors are versus the people that are driving in. You can't tell that. And I think that that's a sign of when we are fully with, that we're not the student or we're not the teacher in this setting, but we're the student. And Fitch talks about in his Faithful Presence book about those 3 circles of our presence, and the third being where we are the guest in someone else's space. And that's such a hard thing, I think, like for Christians to do, is to show up in someone else's space, realizing like we're the guests here. And so in our community, in our neighborhood, we realize that we are the guest. We're learning just as much from one another as it is that, hey, we're serving food for a need or we're providing for people. And I think it's just that intentional with is, you avoid the temptation to try to fix somebody. We're not here in the business, the Lord is in the process of healing and transforming and changing hearts and people's lives. We're not in the business to try to figure out how to change people's problems. That isn't to say that we don't provide resources or support. We have lots of partnerships with community organizations for things like mental health, for food pantry, that have been a part of our table gatherings. That we can point people to and make available, but our presence is to be with and to serve, to serve with our neighbors. And I think another key element of that is that we have people that have taken ownership that I see as not as like the people we're serving, but rather they're friends. Great example. There's this guy named Mike. So Mike he's a veteran. He has a breathing machine or a oxygen support that he's on. He has a walker. And I absolutely, like, Mike is a friend. He'll call or text me like different things. And he shares with all of his neighbors to say, hey, you need to come and join us at the supper table. He's basically like our person of peace in the community because he knows everybody in the neighborhood. Everybody knows him because he goes on walks. He walks there. It's about like 10 blocks to the building. And it's so funny. He has this little entourage of people that follow behind. So it's like, Mike is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer coming down the street. And then he has like all the other reindeer like parading behind him with his walker. And when it gets dark out in the wintertime, he has a light on it. So it literally is like Rudolph that's like leading the way through the darkness and the night. There's probably a sermon illustration somewhere in there. But he's a part of our community. He's a part of the team to get this thing going. Like he's a part of our leadership. He's a part of being one of our table hosts. And he's a part of that community who anybody would pass him by and write him off because of his disabilities, because of his he rents a room out of a rooming house. And so I think that's key, is that it's those authentic relationships and friendships when you're with someone and it's not just serving 2 or 4. And it's being like, you have to be mindful of that, because I think we're so conditioned in the church that we provide all these things to people and we pat ourselves on the back and say, oh, we serve the poor, or we serve this like thing. But I think the most valuable piece and the most powerful piece is when you have friendships and full relationships with people that are very, very different than you. And you can say, I can truly say, I love Mike. And I'm there for him. He's there for me too, in every way. And I think that's where it's, avoiding that temptation to say, I have all the answers and I'm the one that's coming into the setting. And I think it's also important to be mindful of like the environment that we're inviting people into too. So say, we sometimes hear talk about like, different table fellowships, inviting people over to your home for dinner, have a cookout in the backyard. A lot of my friends from the supper table, if I did that, it would be looking down upon them, or would be taken. First off, I think, it would not be a sense of belonging or welcome, but rather it would be to show off what I have, whether my intention is that or not. So my home, while it may be for my next door neighbor or some friends of mine from school or whatever, may be the place to invite them. I've found that for especially folks that are in a socioeconomic place in this time that does not support the lifestyle that I'm living right now, that can be damaging to and harmful to that relationship. So I've learned that the environment makes a difference, that building relationships and trust happens in neutral territory. So really considering what someone else needs and where their comfort level is, as opposed to what my comfort level is. That, like, we talk about third spaces, first space being home, second space being work, and third space being that other place that we hang out. I recognize that my third spaces may be very different than Mike's third spaces, and my friend Pat, who is unhoused, who's living in a tent on the river, those third spaces. And I think that's why it's important for us to be the guest in those relationships with people. And I know also culturally as well, considering, especially, immigrant families, there's that balance too between, that radical hospitality and being sensitive to where someone is in their comfort at their home, whatever their home situation may look like. I've learned to wait to be invited to someone's home, rather than like in church, it's just like, hey, I'm the pastor, I can call you and show up and be okay. But I have to wait to earn that, to earn the trust, to earn the right. And once again, I'm the learner, I'm the student, not the teacher in that setting. And it's, and it's humbling sometimes to be invited into someone's private space that, is they're opening themselves in a way that's kind of a mile marker in that relationship as well, that I've seen. We had a family from Honduras that, that once again warmed up to the point and felt safe and welcome to say, would you like to come over? Would you like to share a meal in our home? And it was a 1-bedroom apartment, and there were many people living there. And just that act of hospitality was so welcoming to me, and really just stepping in as once again, that I'm listening and learning and I'm respecting, but also really feeling honored in this way, that these people that, I mean, I have neighbors that live in $1 million homes, that their offering of hospitality is nothing like, it's like the woman with the 2 pennies. That there's a richness that happened in that sharing of that meal. Yeah, and then I'd say too, the like I related earlier, is also realizing that, the sense of the richness that happens of fellowship around tables, around sharing community, around sharing dialogue, that is that reminder that the loneliness does transcend margins. That loneliness is not confined to any one group of people for any reason. There are people with mental challenges and medical challenges, as well as status in life, or being separated from family, and like I said, the elderly is just a crucial growing number of people that are alone most of their day, most of their time. And it's keeping an eye out for these people that desperately need someone to love them, to show them the love of God, and to be able to be that open ear, to spend time to laugh. I think of this gentleman, Dave. He turned 96 in November, and then he passed away in December suddenly. And this guy, just so many jokes would come out of this guy's mouth, not all clean. Um, and he would be brought by his neighbor to join us at the supper table because he lived alone, had no transportation, mainly spent all of his days by himself. And he was just a crackerjack, like just sharing things. But we had talks. He'd be like, well, he'd be like, why hasn't God taken me yet? Like, all my friends are dead. Um, and we would just have these conversations, and then he actually made burnt CDs. He sang these Sinatra songs and had a recording studio in his one room. And so I still have, bless his heart, I have these CDs of him singing these Frank Sinatra songs, and then he has this like caricature picture like on top, and he wanted to give a gift. But once again, that would have happened hadn't we sought him out and hadn't his neighbors been like, hey, we want to bring you and join around the table. So I think like having eyes out for lonely people, regardless of whether they, Sophie lives in her car. Dave lives by himself in that apartment he lived in that apartment as a 96-year-old. But then also, Rob is a divorced dad who owns the CrossFit gym. And all are in the same boat of seeking out relationship with others and seeking, of course, in their deepest need is a relationship with God. So, so just being aware of that too. And once again, I'm not out to fix people. I'm out to be used by the Lord to show his grace, to open the table to others. So, so I could keep talking, but I just want to pause there and, have just some time to reflect on that. And yeah, if anything that stood out to you, Gino.
Yeah, Kris, thank you so much. That was really good. I've got a bunch of questions, and because you just kind of, so much of what you said just overlaps and overlays with my own experience too, and even in different contexts, which is kind of part of my questions. But there's one thing that you said that I think is so important, and I'm wondering if you could share more about it. Is the supper table is not a soup kitchen. And can you clarify like what you see those differences as being, and maybe why they're important? I think you did, but I wonder if you could do that real clear.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And once again, this is not a degrading remark about soup kitchens. We need soup kitchens because we have people that their bellies are empty. And but a soup kitchen tends to focus on the food as supplying the need for people. The ministry around tables at the supper table is our mission is really that no one leaves feeling alone. That people are filled in more ways than one. And that being the critical piece is that, and we tell anybody that like serves with us, like we've had people from the grocery store that are now like they're donating food, and this one guy's playing guitar for us to play some music and things, and we like communicate that it's like this is not once again us serving behind the serving line slopping food on your plate so that way you can eat tonight. Like, yes, for some people this is the only square meal that they're going to get, but it's more than that. And that we desire people to be building relationships around tables, and we communicate that to our guests who join for the first time, is that, yes, maybe you came here because we're having barbecue chicken tonight, but we know that there's something more in your soul that's looking for more in life.
Yeah.
And we hope that you'll get a taste of that here tonight.
Yeah.
And the cool thing that we can tell when that happens is that nobody wants to leave. So the food is gone. All plates are empty. Everybody's still sitting around the tables.
It's so good. I remember a church that I was a part of that had a food pantry ministry, and they were serving about 40 families every week or so in a small town in South Jersey. And I thought that was really great. And the questions that I kept asking is like, how do you know these people? Are we just providing something for them? And some people did build relationship, but we also found that, most of those families had like 16 pounds of dried beans because they don't know how to cook the beans, and no one knew to have those conversations. There wasn't a relationship is kind of what I'm getting at. And I'm not trying to denigrate the good work that's happening, but I love that you make this emphasis that it's more about people's building relationship and not being alone, while there's other things that we can provide for them. So when I came into Philly, this one story where I kind of started getting these ideas like stirring in my head was there's a wonderful ministry called Broad Street Ministry, and they have an old Presbyterian church on Broad Street. And they did this thing they call radical hospitality. I'd never heard of anything like this. And what they did was they have different restaurants help provide some of the training for cooking a meal, and everyone sits down together with people. And they serve 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. I don't know if they're still doing it since the pandemic, but that idea of just actually sitting with someone, I thought there's something there that I need to learn. And so that's what we've gone after, this idea with the Table Philadelphia of trying to work against this crisis of loneliness, and getting people around food helps, but it's not about the food. It's really about the relationship. So I'm really glad that you make that distinction. And I hope that everyone hears that, because there isn't anything wrong with a soup kitchen. It's just, we're not really just doing that, because we would totally do things differently. You could serve a lot more people.
Yeah, yeah. And part of that too is like, even people that are cooking or said, like, everybody eats and everybody sits down. And I think that's the difference too, is when, regardless of what your specific role may be, is that we're all around tables.
Yeah.
And there's a richness that happens there. And for some people, especially like people that have been churched a while, they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's like they don't realize it at first, but it's like, wow, I'm sitting next to this person that I'm not sure if they bathed. And we're eating together, and or I don't have anything in common. I don't feel like I have anything in common with them. They're not the people that I would normally hang out with. What do I do? And so it's kind of leaning into that and having just a posture of humility too.
Yeah.
And because, like, you're right, like the table and food is the great equalizer. It transcends our differences. It transcends our needs, our backgrounds, our desires. It transcends us and keeps us, shoulder to shoulder as brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. So like, I wonder, I mean, I would love to talk to you more about like some of the contextualization and like maybe some of the differences, but I'm really curious like what others are thinking, and maybe if there's some other questions. I don't want to monopolize your time, but maybe does anyone else have any thoughts? You guys want to jump in, ask Kris a question?
I would like to jump into what you were just talking about, soup kitchen and the table. And in my context here in a smaller town of Winchester, in the 2 decades that I've been a clergy here, primarily what I've been trying to do is convert soup kitchens into table situations, bringing people in, making it a community dinner. We sit down. Normally what the process, I started with Market Street United Methodist Church downtown, and they have a meal that they serve to a group of downtown folks that are on disability or low income, or whoever, that can come in and have something to eat. So several of the churches do that each on a separate day. So I started doing it with Market Street, and what they would do is they'd fix the food back in the kitchen and then just hand it out and never talk to the people that they were serving. So when I started there, I refused to serve. I went and sat down and would eat with them, and then get in conversations. And sometimes there was some pastoring going on. In fact, some people said that was my first church, was that small community that was gathered there, and that usually ranged from 36. But it was converting that into something that was community, sitting down at a table and sharing the food, sharing and opening relationships. And the other way I've done it with several churches that I've had been serving is that they might have like what they call a meal. One of them had a meal that was on once a month on a Wednesday, and it was called Wow, because it used to be connected with a worship on Wednesday, and then they would have the meal. Well, the worship went away, but they kept having the meal. And so but they only invited the people from the church. I says, well, what good is this here? Why don't we invite some people from out in the community? So we did open it up. We had some people coming from, we've got 3 or 4 locations where they're working with handicapped persons or in a home or something like that. We started inviting them in because, again, they're lonely and stuff like that. So a lot of times you have to, with inherited churches, you have to do conversions and try to convert them into something new, and that could be difficult.
That's great, Andy. I think I was going to say that you and Kris were both pointing out something I think is important to highlight, and that is when you put these people that you said you have to convert, the Christians, when you put them in spaces where they have to ask questions or feel like I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, those are, I think some people might respond to that as like, oh my gosh, we can't be normal, like, and kind of, I think actually that's a moment of epiphany for them and say, this is so great that you're asking this question. Because if they weren't in that situation, they would never know any better. So it's so great to kind of bring that kind of invitation to people through a difficult situation for them.
Yeah. Bernard just had a good question.
Yeah.
I think that connects to what Andy was saying too. Is it more helpful to have your own space or nurture such food spaces like church space? I guess my understanding or answer would be, it depends on your context. So for here, we specifically meet at a public building because for many of these people, that church is not seen as safe or can be it's or not welcoming for whatever reason. I mean, there's literally a church right down the street that is offered to host us, and they have a big commercial kitchen and all kinds of stuff, but we've chosen to literally, could we cook at our church building? So in that way, yes, it is it is beneficial to have that space, but we truck everything about a mile away to the borough building just because it's a neutral setting. I mean, people vote in this building. They have dances, they have poker nights, they have community meetings. It's a space that people are comfortable in other ways. And for us, that makes a difference with who we're connecting with. And also we wanted to be in a place that was walkable because most of the people that come do not have transportation and they're riding bikes, they're walking. And so that was who our heart was for. And we didn't want to make that a barrier or an obstacle. So, but I think it depends because you may be in a community where, the church is seen as either, with either indifference or, hey, it's in a positive light, or hey, in some rural areas too, it can be a center of town. And it can be very beneficial to have that both as your hub and also as your gathering space, if that makes sense. So if anybody else has any other thoughts.
I do. I'd love to hear from other people besides myself, but I definitely have experience with this because the first time we ever rented a space for our church was for the purpose of hosting dinner church. And it's a inner city context, so buildings are very expensive and very small. So we rented a 400 square foot corner storefront that looked like a coffee shop. And that was intentional because a lot of the people that I was meeting that were in recovery from drug and alcohol abuse or coming out of prison, some of them were comfortable coming to our homes, but most of them were saying, I'm not. But they wanted to pursue community. They didn't feel like they were ready. I just applaud them for being that honest with me so that I didn't just keep pushing them to this is all we have. So we created this other space. And I'm pretty sure that it's important to not have it as a church space because it's something in the way that we gather, we're trying to be a little bit different than just a church gathering. But I know that churches that have, a fellowship hall do it. So we also, later on after the pandemic, we hosted one at our church gathering space. We were doing a larger brunch church. It never really got any traction because it was in a church building. And so now we're looking to start a new one here in the neighborhood that I'm in North Philly. And at this co-working space, there's a really cool story about people talking about their loneliness. We've been invited to do it here. We've also been invited by a local church to use their church building. And I can tell you the discernment process did not take very long as to which one we want to use. We're going to use the co-working space with all the creatives and all the people that are in my neighborhood right there.
Yeah. Yeah. But the environment matters. It like you can, I mean, you can tell when someone walks into a setting and their shoulders are up, they look insecure, they look like, versus relaxed and, hey, I'm ready and I'm smiling, I'm laughing, I'm met with warmth. And I think being mindful of that too is, for that perspective group of people that you are connecting with, like what makes sense most for them rather than for you.
Yeah, that's good. Bernard, did you have any thoughts on that too? I mean, because the answer is you don't have to have a church building. Bernard, you're saying.
No, I totally, no, I echo that because we don't have a church building, right? So, and so I think we're just kind of in this impasse where we've been renting at a school for the last 12 years. But then that space is becoming more and more negative towards what we're doing. To the point where, we were able to heat stuff up and cook and whatnot. Now, nothing is allowed. And so just kind of having to think through, well, what are some of the other spaces in the neighborhood, in a space where, in a city where it's so expensive to find space, space is such a commodity. And then, in a kind of very divergent neighborhood where there is the really rich and the really poor, not necessarily the space where the really rich would invite the really poor into. And so it just becomes kind of this, tricky space of kind of working out well, how do we be creative, right? I mean, in the summer, we can do picnics and we can do barbecues and we can do park stuff. It's just that when the winter, that's kind of where we're struggling to figure out, what is that space? And I echo a lot of what you guys have talked about too. There are other food programs in the neighborhood, but I think the people who have kind of regularly joined us had commented about the aspect of really the embodiment, the sitting down, the kind of relational, the kind of family feel versus then you're served a meal and that's it. And so I think I think Kris, you were talking about the loneliness pandemic that we're experiencing. I think that is so real, especially after COVID.
Bernard, one little thing, I don't know if this helps at all, but one little adjustment you might say we've made because of being in the city where it's hard to find places with a kitchen that are affordable to us is we just bring the food. And what people have done is they bring stuff too. And we don't cook on site for any of these yet. Maybe that'll happen in the future. I don't know. I kind of have mixed feelings about that. I love to cook, so I'd love to cook with other people, but I also think it gives something really cool when you find that people that are living, 3 guys in a halfway house together and they're cooking to bring whatever the best of their stuff is. Yeah, it's like a giant potluck. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and actually, to your point, Gino, too, it's funny because on this side, as my privileged self, I think, oh, I don't want them to have to feel like they need, we're feeding them, they're doing this. It's the flip side, time and time again. Mike, he wants to cook. He wants to bring his chili. He wants to bring stuff. And it's like a blessing for him to be a part of that. And he makes really good chili, by the way. But it's that's his way of being part of this. And and once again, when we invite people to be a part, it's whatever they offer. It may be the cooking piece. It may be, we have 2 ladies that they come early and they want to put chairs together and set things up. We have this guy Sterling, he wants to clean up way too early. So we have to tell him, we give him a cue, and it's me standing up and walking to a corner of the room. That's his like bell that goes off that he's allowed to start cleaning up, or else he'll like start cleaning up. But he will stay till the end and take dirty trash out and like that. He's a part of this. It's not just like, oh, well, oh no, we'll take care of it, we're fine. Like, no, that I think that's the essential realization, is that it's in us. And sometimes we think that, okay, it's overstepping, or somebody shouldn't be contributing, when for many of these people, like that's a means of their purpose in a way. And it's bigger than me. Like, I need to allow that. And it's humbling.
Yeah,
Totally.
that's really like a shifting of like even power dynamics in many ways, right? Like,
Very
you know,
much.
if you are the host, there's a certain level of power at work. But then when the people who were guests become a host, then it's a very different dynamic, and there's an ownership to it. There's a recognition that this is not just a place that they come to receive, but that they are participating in it. And you know, we've seen that over the years too, where people are like, you know, bring the little things, and that's okay. And, or you know, this elderly lady that comes in, just try to serve, even though you know she can barely stand. But it's her spot, it's her place, right? And so I think like it is very beautiful, and we're definitely mourning right now because we're just really stuck. And so
Yeah. We try to use this language of with people within our church of defining a difference between hospitality and entertaining. Hospitality is something that we receive from God. God is a hospitable God that welcomes us and invites us into welcome, and then we can extend that welcome under God to others, and that they might be people of peace, but also people of welcome as well. Versus this impulse that's totally consumeristic of we're going to entertain people, because that turns people off. Because I think Kris mentioned this really well, of just if you're going to have to keep up with the Joneses to participate, then this is not a hospitable space. This is not a place of welcome. I think hospitality can extend. Entertainment ends at your resources.
Yes.
Any other thoughts or questions, experiences? David Fitch is on the call, Jason, so you don't have to leave. I'm
There
so
he
glad.
is.
I have a question for Kris, but I want to share a thought first. Since laughter was brought up with the elderly, was it Mike? His name? Was that his name?
Yeah.
Just that. FYI, I work as a hospice nurse, and every visit, I always ask the patient when their last bowel movement was, because our goal is comfort. And with the medication that they're on, the lack of bowel movement happens, and it's not very comfortable. So now that we're all uncomfortable, I at last week, one of my visits, asked the patient's elderly wife when her last bowel movement was. We laughed so hard, it was great. And we have a new relationship now. I think it was pretty awesome. So anyway, neither here nor there. I mean, it's kind of related.
Hey, dude, can I just ask you never to ask me when my last bowel movement was? I'm just really, really uncomfortable with that.
If as long as you're not my patient, it probably won't happen most likely. Kris, my question is, like, context of your community that you're telling us about. Like, what's the relationship between that community and the church? Like, are they the same thing? Are they one thing? Is there, what's going on?
Yeah. So, so we knew that, like, when we started this table fellowship with the supper table, that this was not for our church. So, like, I think like Gino and Andy were just talking about, like, that this was going to be its own really like organic ministry around tables and food. And so while like our church and like I'm the pastor and we have several people that caught that vision and have that passion and are already been like very active, by the way, involved in this specific neighborhood and connecting with people. Those are the people that we invited to like spearhead and begin to kind of get things started. But I told my congregation, I mean, I literally got up on a Sunday morning and told them, you're not invited unless you like show up and you bring a neighbor that is, you know, a part of this community. So we told them like, please don't come. Because I don't want it to be, it's not for them. Like this is for our neighbors. And so yeah, so that's the connection. And it's funny, like you create that culture and it's like you realize this isn't for us. Like that it changes people in the process too, because now like the church celebrates like the ministry that's happening in the supper table because it's a we, you know, this is Mike, this is Sterling, this is Sophie, this is Cindy, who's a longtime member at our church. This is like, it's all of us together that are a part of it rather than our church is serving those people or, this is its own little soup kitchen that's happening over there. Like it's neither of those. It's a celebration and a kind of ascending. But it required us being the guests first in that community. And then our guests, yeah, it's funny how I think Bernard just like pointed that out is like, you know, that our guests then became the hosts. So it's this whole thing that's just literally flip tables upside down. That's just beautiful. You know, and I'm still like, you know, learning along the way. And, you know, unfortunately, like we've had some people in the recovery community got really close with and had been serving or whatever. And then all of a sudden they like vanished and here they got arrested and are now serving time. And, so like there's heartbreak too, when you're, you know, having authentic relationships. You know, there's this one guy, he was incarcerated. I like tried to reach out, could not get in touch with anybody. Like people are asking like, hey, what happened to so-and-so? And it's hard stuff sometimes too. Like there's not all great, beautiful celebrations. It's somebody overdosed. And so there's just a lot, you know, and some people that have had some mental health challenges too. And you know, and once again, they're just so much a part of this community, and they're serving in the capacity that they're able to, and they want to, and they're there. But also I know that I have to, you know, I mean, we'll laugh, like I'll be like, George, did you take your meds today? You know, and I can do that because I have a relationship with him. But on a serious level too, to be like, hey, is there a like, did he not have enough money to go and get the medication that he needs to be on? Has he been to the doctor this year? Has he had things checked? So that's like where we come in too. Like I'm not a mental health professional by any means, but I can help surround him with that support to make sure that he gets the help that he needs as well. So, and that's part, I think, what, you know, it's where we are mind, body, soul that works together. That's his wellness and that's his healing that happens too.
You can probably help them in ways that a lot of professionals can't actually with that stuff. All right, sorry, another quick question, because as a follow-up, because you brought up, you probably kind of said this to a degree, or maybe even directly, but I probably need to hear it again, having heard everything else, and hopefully I'm not the only one. Because you were talking about like being a guest, where the community becomes the host. You're also talking about like a third space, where so. Is it in the church building? Is it like next to it? Is it like off in the corner of the church? Is it like
No,
like
it's a mile away in a public building. We have like townships and boroughs here. So basically our governing structures have a building where their offices are, but they have what's called a community room. And so we meet there. And the cool part of it is that like the mayor and everybody, like they liked what we were doing so much, like you can use it for free. So, which is a cool thing. So we bless them too. And we share stories and we give them desserts as well. So yeah, so it's a distance from where our congregation meets on Sunday.
So it's like everybody's a guest of the community.
Yeah. And like I said, this is a common space that people use for everything. So it's familiar to our neighborhood, and that's why it's a safe space too. So they already feel welcome in other venues, so why not this one?
Any other questions? We have some time for a couple more.
I was thinking of because in my setting here, I'm in a very rural area. I'm not in Winchester proper, where my churches are down south, and in that setting, the churches, in a sense, are the community centers, and that's what the way churches used to be. They are community centers. So sometimes we have to. That would be our our jumping off point, but what you're talking about being guests, I guess that's where I'm working a little bit different. I'm pulling people out of the church to saying we're the guests in this community, doing the resident alien kind of stuff. And we're the guests in this community, and we go into these places and we learn about them and we speak to them, find out what their needs are, talk to what are their solutions for their needs. That's something I learned from Sam Wells. But you need to have those kind of conversations, and that's what I'm trying to do in my particular context.
So
Yeah.
Andy.
Yeah.
Hey, Kris,
Yeah,
I got a question for you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Can I just want to throw
Yeah.
out
No,
something
please
else
do.
that just into mind. So a couple questions never to ask someone that is, that is coming or in a marginalized background. Never
Besides their
ask.
last bowel movement.
Oh, what's that?
Besides their last bowel movement.
Yeah, you don't ask that. No. What's your take home for tonight? That question? No. Yeah, don't ask, where do you work? Where do you live? What do you do? Where are you from? Never ask any of those things unless you develop a relationship first. And those are the common questions that we ask the people that are in similar jobs. When a friend introduces you at a dinner party or at a cookout or whatever, we tend to ask those things. And for like, I've seen it happen, and we have well-meaning people that do it, like, oh, well, what do you do for a living? And this person, like, they just had a nervous breakdown and they just got released from the hospital, and they're living with their sister, and they are not working, and they have no idea what they're going to do next. Like, so it's like, once again, those are very things that can come off like very easy for a conversationalist, but it's just coming up with, I usually talk about future-based questions, like, hey, what are you most hopeful of? What are you looking forward to next? And then we also have some dialogue too around the tables around like our devotion, our kind of scripture story of the day. But anyway, that's just a tidbit to be wary of, that like most of the time we don't even realize it. Yeah.
That's really good. Super helpful. So, okay, here's a question for you. Say you're someone here listening in and you want to get started with one of these table fellowships. What are some, maybe one do and one don't if you have them, or maybe if you're only positive and you've got some suggestions of how to get something started?
Yeah, I mean, I think the do is like to start with the listening. I think too often we want to hit the ground running and have a pre-manufactured home that we just want to plop down, and this is our ministry. But I think just starting and listening to your context, wherever you are, who are the people in your community, what are the needs, who do you not see? Oh, and there's my cat. There he is. But who do you not see? Spending time just doing that intentional listening to your neighborhood. Or if you're in a rural context, driving around, walking around, talking to neighbors, just being intentional and listening to what God might be calling you to do and what God is already doing. Yeah. And then I think that goes along with the don't, is like, don't go in with a preconceived idea. It's going to look like this. This is where we're going to gather. This is what we're going to do. Eventually a plan is good and you need plans, but I think when you're starting off, being holding those things very lightly.
That's really good. Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Thanks for leading us in this. This was really good and
Thank you. Thank you for
profitable
the invite.
discussion. Yeah. Fitch, you feel like sending us off with a blessing since you really didn't do anything on this call this
He
week?
didn't. He just showed up.
Everybody, I've enjoyed this immensely, listening and everything. And Kris, you've been great. Everyone's been great. By the way, Josh, I don't think I've ever met you. Of all the people in the room, I don't know who are you and where you're from.
I'm in Boston. Yeah, we're here. Yeah, we're part of a microchurch network. Some of the people do kind of table fellowship type stuff. Some people do other stuff.
Yeah.
Just trying stuff out.
Cool. Nice to meet you. By the way, my last couple of years of high school was in Brockton, Massachusetts, about 20 miles south of Boston, in an old, rough, blue-collar neighborhood. Anyways, what do you want me to do again, Gino?
You can send us off with a blessing.
Yeah, Lord, we just thank you for this gathering tonight of people. Lord, we just pray a blessing on all of our efforts. Help us to listen, like Kris just said. Help us to pay attention. Help us to take steps of faith and sit with people, share a beverage, start these tables. May your work for your kingdom flourish among all the various places where we live. We pray it all in Jesus' name for your honor and glory. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everybody.